Greetings, my little ghoulies, and welcome to the Astral Realm, where today we are taking a look at the horrors of the Static Sea, which was a one-night-only immersive horror experience set on a haunted Welsh island that I had the pleasure of attending and nearly losing my soul to. Created by STORMJAR Studio, the story is one of radio waves plagued by paranormal apparitions and monsters, with one man desperate to find his long-lost love in the supernatural static of Holm Island. Only, in this scenario, there was no console to load up. The first-person camera perspective was my actual face, the inventory was whatever pockets I could shove things into on my sensible walking outfit, and the stamina bar was my own endurance for clambering across a haunted Welsh island in the middle of the night. Yes, that does mean I was playing on impossible mode. As a lover of escape rooms, immersive theatre, scare mazes, and the real-life experiences that both draw inspiration from our favourite horror media, as well as inform how scares are made in games, The Static Sea was the most perfect blend of uncannily familiar and wildly new that I wanted to share my time on Holm Island here, and reassess indie game making from a whole new angle. With that in mind then, I am the folk horror pub landlady, Ash, and these are the real-life horrors of the Static Sea. Okay, you're gonna have to let me just get a little indulgent here for a minute. Horror as we know it has been tempered in the flames of campfires the world over, where the oral tradition of storytelling and passing down moralistic warnings of monsters and madness is part of the human experience. Maybe in the years since, the glowing embers of a fire have transformed into the dancing pixels of a television screen, but the idea remains the same. There's this primal fear that keeps us alive, the reason we have a fight or flight instinct or suffer from an irrational phobia, and we tap into it by spinning horror stories meant to entertain and terrify. I say all of this because heading to Holm Island for an immersive horror experience felt like returning to the foundations of what video games are built on, or the location scouting that sparks the whole tone of a horror film like The Wicker Man or Eden Lake. So often are games praised for their photorealism that it makes sense to cast aside all the trappings of controllers and headsets and just wander out into the middle of the night to feel it firsthand. Preferably with a torch so you can see it though. It's nearly impossible to pin down the exact nature of the Static Sea despite having been a part of it, mainly because it's so many things at once. Part Discord-based mystery game where players spent weeks decoding cryptic transmissions from Holm Island, the location where the first radio signal was successfully received across water in 1897, just to give some context to the theme here, which then culminated in the one-night live event, the part where we were subjected to all manner of horrors emerging from the night. Another fundamental part, as just proven, is both the impressive and gruesome history that Holm is steeped in, where characters and stories are plucked from and given the old spooky treatment. Just to throw it back to the old film studies here, I think if you look at something like Le Jetée, a 60s science fiction film told through still photos, you might get the vibe of this early setup. Then the payoff really nails the everybody's gone to the rapture vibe of wandering through an abandoned British setting full of environmental secrets and town history that shapes what you learn as you explore. As for our arrival then, the group was made up of 10, including competition winners that had won a crowdfunding raffle draw and press, which I was one of. We gathered at Cardiff Harbour before jumping onto a tiny speedboat out to Holm Island, an isolated fistful of rock you can walk across in less than 15 minutes, usually home to over 300,000 protected gulls. It's now barren whilst they're migrating and covered in bones and animal bodies that have passed away from natural causes, making for the perfect horror setting before any setup takes place. Surrounded on all sides by unpredictable seas that have smashed countless boats against the rocky shoreline, the defining feature of the island is the gigantic lighthouse towering above the waves. The first thing we could make out whilst holding onto our lunches as the boat hurtled us to our destination. No points for guessing what live-action Ash is going to say next. It was a lot like Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, actually. Holm itself is a pretty special location, and the heart of horror that informs the Static Sea's experience. Like I said, it's usually a massive gull party for nesting birds, with one warden living on the island with less than 10 volunteers to keep up conservation efforts. It's this gorgeous mix of unruly nature and very time-specific buildings, with an old Victorian cholera hospital nestled in the brambles, war ammunition stores running underground, and inaccessible swaths of land covered in protected species of plants. Despite how beautiful and tranquil Holm Island might seem, I feel like its sinister undertone can be best summed up with one fun fact. The island's lead content is so high that everything that grows there, everything that eats there, anything that is there is basically incredibly poisonous to humans. You eat a blackberry, you die. You stroke a rabbit, you might not die, but the rabbit is full of lead.
Once there, we were trapped in a cottage until nightfall, which is when we were transported to the 1920s and led to the shattered bones of a ruined building by the fictional warden of the island and star of our story, Sebastian. It is here where the Static Sea threw open its doors to the paranormal and pushed us into a radio wave seance, consorting with the machine Sebastian had crafted in order to contact his dead lover, who perished by gas in the First World War. Each of us were forced to put our hands on a skull-emblazoned machine.
That frankly was needlessly sticky, just to note.
In an attempt to see who was most sensitive to the static. It's at this point that Lily, someone I had made fast friends with as another content creator that had joined us on our trip over from Cardiff, betrayed us all and was revealed to be part of the performance. Or at least I hope she was, as she got possessed and her throat slit by Sebastian, which is really a terrible turn of events for what was supposed to be a nice, fun game. Sebastian then told us all of our lives were in danger, as his device had opened up the doorway for the ghosts of Flatholm to return and our own spirits to be disassociated from our bodies. A paranormal purgatory with the only way out being to find an item, a poppet, with our name on it to rebind our bodies and souls as one. As someone in the business of trying to not get their throat cut by knife-wielding maniacs on inescapable islands in the middle of the night, I was inclined to give it a good go, as was my new and now highly suspicious friend, McKenna from Shiver Dark History on TikTok.
Now, this is where we go full walking simulator mode, or walking simulator mode to be more accurate. Or just walking at this point, I guess.
Given free rein to explore and told to reunite poppets with their owners, if we wanted to free them, that is, the Static Sea came to life, with ghosts set up in their graves across the island, each with a story to act out silently if we wished to communicate with them. The choices were to listen, or to attempt to gamble for the poppets they'd accrued whilst we'd been yapping in the ruins, a simple game of chance as you roll competing dice for the highest number. Between each ghost, the dark island sprawled outwards, the sound of radio broadcasts cutting through the night as Lily's disembodied voice begged for help. We eventually realised Morse code snippets were also breaking through and could be entered into Sebastian's paranormal skull device, leading us to find other poppets hidden in the historical buildings of Flatholm. The magic that made this horror game extra spooky, though, was STORMJAR Studios' Nightmare Market.
This is the overarching anthology title for all of the horrific stories that STORMJAR are brewing up, but in the Static Sea it was a real-life place inhabited by strange interdimensional creatures.
Ones that could buff our dice power by trading in tales from our darkest dreams, or offer us trades of poppets for other characters if we completed tasks on the island. You see the video game influence here, right? Best of all, the closer to the night market we got, the more terrifying the ghostly apparitions became, with an undead Viking muttering in broken Norwegian and the monstrous, unknowable Lowry towering over its visitors like a malformed Wendigo.
Of course, he was my favourite of the night.
We met the real-life history of the island warped through the Static Sea's horror lens, the decoded transmissions that preceded the event all turning out to be lore for the apparitions now rising up from the dead. A lighthouse keeper's wife whose murdered body disappeared under mysterious circumstances, a gunner that blew himself up in the munitions storage by lighting a match, a pagan surrounded by animal bones, and so many more with stories to be uncovered in the few measly hours we had to recover our own severed spirits. It all culminated in a bonfire where we celebrated the returned living that had secured their poppets and sent the dead back to the static. Where, fortunately, as one who had recovered her poppet by bullying another player into handing it over, I was allowed to run off and go to one of the smallest pubs in Wales on Flatholm Island.
Don't hate the player, hate the game, baby!
The whole experience was so surreal, it still feels like a weird, half-remembered nightmare somewhere between sleeping and awake, which sounds exactly right for STORMJAR's brand of immersive horror experience set to be unleashed as the years go on. As an avid horror gamer, it is hard to tell you just how exciting it was to be plunged into a whole real-life world designed for uncovering the nasty secrets of, and to witness a whole new facet of indie game making that can only exist with communities of horror-loving weirdos. Especially after that Alone in the Dark experience that nearly killed me.
I always hope when I'm making videos or content that I'm putting you onto things that maybe you haven't heard of as a horror fan, or you have and you just want to learn loads more about because you love the genre so much. So to be able to talk about the Static Sea in this way has been a real pleasure. But also a little bit sad for me because it was a one night only special. So I can tell you all about it, but I can't send you out there to Flat Home to experience it for yourself. Luckily, however, there is a new game coming to STORMJAR's Discord which recaptures all that transmission-based brilliance of the start of the Static Sea in a whole new environment, which comes very, very soon, Halloween, and you should definitely check it out. Titled Ghost Cities, you can hop in at 7 PM GMT on the night to play along and discover the strange disappearances linked to abandoned mega constructions.
The guys behind STORMJAR, Soph and Jim, are wonderful spooky people with absolutely fabulous brains for winding, intense stories. And I personally cannot wait to see what else they're going to create going forward.
You should definitely check out Ghost Cities, which is totally free to play, and get a little taste of the STORMJAR home horror brew to see what I mean. And there you have it. That was my experience with immersive horror game, The Static Sea. I know it sounds cliche, but please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and check out my other channels on Twitch, my VOD channel over on YouTube, and my socials, which are all linked down below and full of spooky horror goodness. I also want to give a massive shout out to my patrons on Patreon who are just amazing, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you. So thank you so much to Donnie Sturges, Fernando Babylonia, Jake Holding, Kira87, Neil, Purple Say 77, Rebecca, Snoozles, and Sarah R. Stapleton. See you in the static.